Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. Now, when out running the trucks, there's a couple of spots we go to that have some fairly monster hills that are at best a major struggle to get the usual 1/10 trucks to the top of. Whenever we're at one of these hills, it always seems like a good idea to build something specific to climb the hills quickly. So I put together a really broad set of rules where essentially as long as it's vaguely scaled with the driver, you're good to go. For a course, we'll probably use some barrier tape for a straight run, as well as adding a couple of corners so the trucks have to be able to steer too. All being well, in a few weeks we'll have a test session and see how it goes. I went through the trucks I already have, and there's a couple that would make a good starting point, like the G-Made GOM, which already has a fairly forward weight bias, but I really want to build a truck specifically for going up hills, and the GOM works really quite well for rocky trailing as it is. So here we have an FTX Mauler, also known as the HSP or RGT Rockhammer, and I think there's a couple of other ones too. It's your typical Chinese truck with surprisingly good part support. It's shaft-driven, four-wheel drive, has 2.2 wheels and tyres, a body with a driver, a nice chunky-looking chassis, and importantly for going uphill, an unusually long wheelbase at 350mm. A quick mention to the packaging, there's no extra plastic anywhere, so other than a couple of bags, everything can go straight into the recycling bin, so top marks for that. It's always a bit sad these days when you open a box to find it full of polystyrene. The truck is about as ready to run as it's possible to get. It's a shame it's not a kit, but that's just how the lower end of the market is these days. Thankfully, the higher end seems to be going back to kits, and there's Tamiya of course, but the bargain models are almost always ready to run. In the accessories box we have the charger. Now the kit comes with a 9mm pack too, so if the truck was bought as a Christmas present, you could get it charged up. However, this wall wart charger is going to take a good 4 or 5 hours to get the job done, so it would be a great idea to get a proper hobby charger at the same time. Then you can charge up in less than an hour. The transmitter is the one you get with most of the FTX trucks. It's functional, and importantly it has a settable endpoint for the steering. It only needs 4 AA's for power, which is nice. There's still some radios around that need 8. The only downside is the plastic feels pretty cheap and nasty, VHS cassette material quality. It's going to get the truck going though, so it'll do for the time being. Right, to the main event, let's have a look at the truck. The body has a plastic cage with polycarbonate panels that are pre-painted. I rather like the bright colours, but I could do without the skulls. I was hoping they'd be stickers, but surprisingly they're in the paint. Good quality stuff, but not really the look I'm after. You can get clear panels to paint yourself though, so it's not the end of the world. Once the 4 body clips are off, you can lift the body to find it still attached at the front. For some strange reason there's a hinge widget to keep it attached. I'm guessing it's supposed to be convenient, but as far as I can tell it's only going to make it get in the way when you're trying to swap the battery or do any sort of trail side repair. At the very front there's a pair of screws and nuts which we can remove so we can take the body off entirely. You just need a Phillips screwdriver and a 5.5mm nut driver. Pop the 2 screws out and we can reveal the chassis in all its glory. I'm sure the guy that designed the hinge meant well, but if you've already got the 4 body posts and clips, you don't really want to have to deal with the hinge as well. The first thing that jumps out is up at the front we have the included battery. It's in a nice plastic tray with a couple of Velcro straps. A nice basic, no-nonsense setup. The trouble is that the 9mm battery is only 2000 mAh. Good enough to get the truck going, but the run times aren't going to be great compared to a higher capacity 9mm, or better yet a Lipo. The good news is though, they've actually used Dean's connectors. They're not my favourite, I'd rather see XT60s, but they're infinitely better than the old Tamiya connectors that you still see on some RTR trucks. On the chassis itself, the suspension is nice and smooth, although it does feel a bit stiff, but that's probably at least partly because there's no battery or body on. We'll have to wait for the test run to get a real feel for it. Looking at the underside, we see the ever so common HSP axles. They're not the best and they're not the worst. The main thing is that spares are really easy to get hold of, unlike some low-end models. One thing that did surprise me, the yokes on the prop shafts are metal. I'm guessing they're probably steel, so they should last a good bit longer than the plastic ones that you usually see. At the back we have an all-in-one ESC and receiver. Now I really don't like these, but they do get the truck up and running. Also, it's a waterproof setup, which is a major plus. At the very front there's a waterproof 9 kg/cm servo, which again will get you going, but it's only just good enough. The big tyres do need quite a bit of power to steer. Now I may sound a bit down on the truck, but everything is typical on almost all ready-to-runs. Even Axial's new SCX-10.3 RTR has an all-in-one ESC and receiver. It's a rather nice one, but it still makes upgrading more difficult than it really should be. The Traxxas TRX4 has a notoriously bad set of servos. Sadly, it's just the way things are. Generally, the electronics are only just good enough to get you going, and nothing more. With the transmitter powered up with its 4 AA's, we can connect up the NIMI to the ESC and see if it actually works. There's a power switch mounted just in front of the ESC that needs to get turned on. And there we go. Another little bonus I hadn't noticed, there's a pair of white LEDs in the front bumper. Very nice. It's a shame there's no red LEDs at the back, but still the front ones are nice to have. And well, it goes. It's stopping like there's a drag brake, so that's nice. You can hear the steering servo is pretty well loaded up to turn the wheels. Yeah, it does work okay, but it's not quite as sprightly as I'd like. Something to do before the test run, we need to set the steering endpoint so we don't overstress the servo. If we flip the truck over, we can use the steering DR knob to set how far the servo moves. Fresh out of the box at full lock, the knuckles have hit their mechanical limits long before the servo stops. All we need to do is adjust the knob until lock to lock on the steering wheel, as the servo moving end to end without binding. It only takes 2 minutes to do, and it's going to make the servo last quite a lot longer. Something else I noticed, the front right wheel seems to have a bit of a wobble. Turns out the wheel nut just hasn't been done up. Yep, like most RTRs, the build quality isn't the best. I've heard some people taking the axles apart to find no grease, among other niggles. I'm going to have to give this one the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to run it as is. The drivetrain is fairly quiet when I run it back and forth, so there's most likely at least something in there. If you have some other trucks, there's a good chance that you already have some Lipos. So let's have a quick look at using them on the truck. First, we've got the typical square hardcase 2S pack, and it fits perfectly in the tray with the straps almost being designed for it. The pack has an XT60 connector, so I'm going to need an adapter for Deans. All simple stuff, just a straight swap really. The ESC doesn't auto-detect when you have a Lipo connected, so we need to swap one of the jumpers. Near the bottom right there's a NIMI Lipo option. All we need to do is pull the jumper out from the NIMI side and plug it back in on the Lipo side. It doesn't do that much except enable a low voltage cutoff so we can't over discharge our Lipo. All typical stuff, but still important to remember. Now we can plug the Deans into the adapter and we're ready to go. Except we can't get the body on. Those chunky battery leads coming out the top of the battery are getting in the way. The panel in the body with the drivers on is quite low, so there's not much clearance. Not a big deal though, we just need a battery where the leads come out at the end rather than the top. If we try this 4000 mAh 2S flight pack, the leads sit much lower. The battery is a little bit longer, so it doesn't quite fit in the tray, but it should be okay for a test. What we'll really need to do is make a slightly longer battery tray so the pack is nicely protected. With the wires tidied away, we can pop the body back on with its body clips and go for a test run. So here we are outside yet again. It's been raining quite a bit, so the ground isn't so dusty anymore. It's still firm, but there's a layer of soft mud on the top. For the first part of the test, I did put the NIMI back in. I figured I might as well give it a test and see how it goes. What I'm going to do in this video is use a few clips to highlight things, and I'll upload a separate video with more of the driving. That way you'll get the full 50 frames a second and you can hear the drivetrain. So immediately the first thing you notice is the steering lock is terrible. The turning circle is huge, and that's going to be a real disadvantage if you're crawling. For hill climbing it's not going to be quite so important, but it's still not really good enough. The first hill climb was a fairly easy hill with a bit of a groove. As always in a video, it's difficult to get across just how steep it is. If you were trying to walk up, you'd end up on your hands and knees before you got to the top. The truck though cruises up no problem. The second hill is a little bit steeper, with loose dirt and a few bits of tree to get past. The truck's struggling a bit more this time, as you would expect. The real obstacle on this one are the tree roots at the very top. Usually if you catch it just right, you can hook around to the right, but it's really tricky, especially with a truck that you're not familiar with. After a few attempts, you can see the tyres are packed with mud. They're pretty much just slicks at this point. They're not catching on anything. Not good. We might be able to modify them by cutting some of the tread, or perhaps we'll just have to change the tyres completely. Eventually, the inevitable happened and the truck made its way back down to the bottom all by itself. There you go, now you can see just how steep the hill is. After about 25 minutes, the 9mm pack gave up. It was fairly warm, so the truck's pulling quite a bit of power trying to get up those hills. For the rest of the run, I put a Lipo back in to see how it goes. And well, the truck's a lot punchier with a Lipo. It's much nicer to drive in general. You get an instant response from the throttle. I'm guessing the included 9mm pack just isn't all that good. Still, its main goal is to get the ready-to-run truck going, so it does at least achieve that. And now, back to the studio. And the first thing is, you can really see just how packed with mud those tyres are. Towards the end, they had almost zero traction to get up the hill. Pretty much completely useless. We could try cutting away every other set of knobbles, so there's a bit more space between the threads. But I think we're going to be better off trying to find a good deal on a new set of tyres with a better tread pattern. Otherwise, the rest of the chassis held up rather well. It tumbled quite a few times, but there's no signs of anything letting go. It's all still straight and true. For mods, I think to get around the tight turns on the course, we're going to need more steering. To be different though, I'm not going to try and modify the knuckles. Rather, I'm going to make it 4-wheel steering and swap the radio for a FlySky GT3. That way, we can lock the rear steering out for stability going up the straight bits, then enable it to get round the tight bits. Now I'm not sure how well it's going to work, but it's going to be fun to find out. Also, in the axles, one of the really bad bits of this truck, the lockers that transmit all the power from the crown gear to the axle shafts are made from plastic. They work, but eventually they're going to let go, causing the truck to lose drive on a wheel. Especially if you drive on high grip surfaces. Spinning the wheels on slick mud, they're going to last a while, but it's still not good. Thankfully though, you can get metal replacements. From FTX they're fairly expensive, but you can get HSP branded ones for 15 quid or so. It's not a big deal to swap them, but it's worth keeping in mind that at some point you are going to need to upgrade. Another thing that we could do with upgrading, we could do with some more wheel speed. So we'll probably end up swapping out the stock motor for something slightly hotter. I'm not sure what the stock motor is, but a 35 or 45 turn 540 will probably do the trick. That, and when we upgrade the electronics, we can run it on 3S. As long as the drivetrain can handle it, we should have plenty of power. So there we go then, that's the FTX Mauler. Good value for money, but not without some flaws. But I think for what we want, it's going to be a great platform. Right, that's it for this week then. As always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!